So now we're going to look at hormonal regulation of the reproductive system in both males and females. Um, we haven't really talked about the endocrine system in this class, so a quick overview to help you understand hormones and how they work. Um, think of the nervous system. We've talked about the nervous system. Think of that like Gmail. Basically, with the nervous system, the cells are lined up, one cell next to the other, and a signal is sent directly from one cell to another. It's much like email. If I want to send you an email, I send an email directly to you and you get the message. The endocrine system is more like Twitter. Basically, these chemicals called hormones are put into the bloodstream. They're just sort of sent out into the blood. Every single cell has access to them, but only certain cells are able to respond to them or have the proper receptors, we call, to respond to them. And so it's a bit like Twitter. You just put a bunch of stuff out there. Everyone has access to it, can see it, but only certain people are interested, only certain people care, only certain people respond and do something. And so that's kind of how hormones work. They're just out into the bloodstream, but only certain cells respond. And so here's just kind of a picture. Here's a cell producing the hormone. It goes into the bloodstream, and then you can see it binds to a little protein receptor in the target cell, and then causes a change. Some other hormones actually enter the target cell and cause a change in the cell that way. But basically, only certain cells are going to respond. Now, the hypothalamus and pituitary gland are responsible for regulating the release of many hormones in your body and maintaining proper levels in the body. Now, the hypothalamus, you may remember, is this region of the brain right here. It kind of looks like that W down here. And then attached to it is that pituitary gland. This is about the size of a pea, and it's kind of directly in the center of your head. If you could like make a perfect center, it'd probably be about where that pituitary gland is. And so I want to start by looking at males and understanding how hormone regulation works in males, and then we'll turn our attention to females. So the testes produce testosterone, and the testosterone is responsible for male secondary sex characteristics. So the deeper voice, the facial hair and body hair, the added muscle mass that many, not all men have, but most men have, the development of external genitalia, etc. So how is that testosterone regulated? Men have a fairly constant level of testosterone in their blood at all times. How is that maintained? Well, it turns out that it's maintained with something called negative feedback. So what happens is the hypothalamus releases a hormone. You don't need to know the name of this. It's called GnRH, gonadotropic releasing hormone. And that stimulates the pituitary gland and causes it to release two other hormones, FSH and LH. These two hormones then act on the testes and cause them to produce testosterone. So basically, this tells this to do something, which tells this to do something. Now, here's the key. The key is testosterone then inhibits the release of these hormones by the pituitary, and testosterone inhibits the release of this hormone from the hypothalamus. In other words, testosterone shuts off its own production. So as testosterone levels start to climb, maybe this is hard on my little screen, it's mirrored. As testosterone levels climb, it shuts off its own production, and then levels start to fall. But then if levels fall, it stops shutting off its own production because it's not around as much, and then levels climb up. And so in this way, testosterone levels stay pretty constant at all times. So men are pretty even Steven in terms of testosterone levels. It just kind of stays roughly constant all the time. And that is due to this negative feedback mechanism. And so here's just another analogy. It's kind of like your furnace. If it's too hot in the house, then the thermostat tells the furnace stop producing heat. It does, and then your house cools down. And then when your house cools down, then the thermostat says, hey, it's too cold, start producing heat. And then it does that. And so your temperature in your house, boop, even Steven. Testosterone levels, boop, even Steven, both following the same mechanism. So let's see what happens now. What would happen if we introduce added testosterone in the form of artificial steroids? So steroids are an illegal drug. You may have heard of this with athletes and things like that. What happens if we add steroids to the mix? We just add this artificial testosterone. Well, um, basically what happens is we get added testosterone. And if you recall, testosterone is involved in a number of things, including increased muscle mass. And so in the short term, men do get increased muscle mass, as illustrated by this little specimen right here. Um, and so so that's kind of the idea behind anabolic steroids. And a lot of athletes, not a lot, but some athletes you've heard of have abused these to help get a competitive edge in athletics. Well, here's the problem, though, and here's why steroids are illegal. If you add more testosterone into the body, you're also going to inhibit the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And so these glands are no longer going to stimulate the testes. And your body is a very efficient system. So if your body goes for a long time where it has high testosterone levels, but it's never needing to stimulate the testes, then your body's like, hey, what's going on? I've got all this testosterone, but I'm never needing to stimulate its production. So I must have too many testosterone producing cells. So your body starts to break down the testes, and they atrophy is the fancy word for that. They shrink down in size. And so now your body's natural production of testosterone is low. And so when you inevitably stop taking those steroids, well, then your testes are going to atrophy. And because they're small now, you can't produce as much testosterone naturally as you were before. So then you see decreased sperm production, you get a higher voice, and males will even develop breasts as a result. Testosterone is really the only thing stopping breast development in men. So basically, the manly hormone testosterone is actually, if you take that artificially, it actually feminizes men because of this negative feedback system. So then a common question, well, what happens if we give women artificial steroids? Women do have natural testosterone, not as much as men. So what happens if we give them that added dose? Well, basically, women become masculinized. They get more hair growth on their face and chest, a deeper voice, breast reduction, altered menstrual cycle, and things like that, because they don't have that same negative feedback system that men do. So basically, to control testosterone levels, or at least the levels aren't supposed to be as high. So basically, anabolic steroids are basically testosterone, and taking these has the effect of feminizing men and masculinizing women. Same chemical, totally different effects because of this. Crazy. So I think I'm going to stop there, and then in our next one, we'll look at female hormonal regulation. Spoiler alert, way more complicated than men. Turns out having a baby and making a person grow inside you, it's complicated. So we'll talk about that next.